Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me. For those who do not know me yet, my name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness in Blue Jeans, and I fell ass backwards into mindfulness and insight meditation 24 years ago this month. It's April now, so 24 years ago this month, I was going through a period where I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and an out-of-control panic disorder that had resulted in full-blown agoraphobia. I was unable to leave the house. I was on short-term disability, couldn't go past my front door without a meltdown of panic. Happened to get paired up with a psychologist who, even back at that time, was already several decades deep into practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation. And he offered me these tools and techniques as a way of dealing with what I was going through. And I was not thrilled with what he offered me. My feeling was, dude, I can't work. I can't go past the front door. I can't be social. I can't do anything. My life has stopped. And here's this guy saying, let's sit and watch the breathing for a while. Awesome. Thanks. Get right on that. I didn't have anything else to work with at the time. I was sitting at home panicking all day anyway. I figured, all right, I'm going to try this just long enough I can honestly go back to the guy and say, look, dude, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now? And as I say, that was 24 years ago this month. And I never did have that conversation with him. And I'm still practicing. I'm still doing this. I'm doing these kinds of sessions here, right? I'm ready to admit there might be something to it all. And so here we are. And today's talk is about dread. And this one really gets to the core of what I was going through during that time that I was trapped at home. What I was diagnosed with was clinical depression, clinical anxiety, panic disorder. What I was feeling more than anything else at the time was dread. It was this powerful, powerful dread. So I want to get into that a little bit. But the first thing I want to say is you don't have to be experiencing dread right now necessarily to get something out of what we're going to be talking about and practicing today, because this applies to any emotional state, really. So if you're going through a period of dread right now, we can work with that. If you're not, you don't have to try to create dread in order to get something out of this, okay? In my logic-based type A personality, very organizational, very analytical, I always find it helpful to start off by defining what it is that I'm dealing with. Kind of helps with that black cloud effect where there's this vagueness, this haziness about what we're trying to deal with. And that in itself is not very helpful. I find that putting some definition around, some parameters around what the issue is a good first step. That's always been a good first step for me. So what do I mean by dread? In my experience of dread, this is how I ultimately defined it. It's this anticipation of an experience, of an unpleasant feeling that is overwhelming and feels unstoppable and maybe permanent. Okay? An anticipation of an experience, of a feeling that is overwhelmingly unpleasant and feels unstoppable and maybe permanent. And the anticipation itself can start to feel overwhelming and unstoppable. So it kind of piles on top of itself. And the image that I always got was that of a suffocating blanket. You ever get under one of those, like those weighted blankets? That's what it felt like just trying to move. I felt like I was under a weighted blanket that was made of lead. just trying to move felt like trying to lift a mountain. Just this crushing sense of doom. As I started working with this, I had 3 insights that really changed the way I approached dread. And the first one was this noticing that I felt stuck when dealing with dread. It was this feeling of being stuck. But then I noticed that wasn't entirely accurate. I didn't just feel stuck. Yes, I felt like I couldn't move under this suffocating blanket of lead, but there was something else going on. That suffocating blanket felt like it was weighing me down from the outside. Something different was happening inside. Inside, there was this racing urgency. There was this tremendous energy happening. One of the things that I talk about a lot in this practice and why we engage in mindfulness and insight meditation is so that we can begin to clearly see how we are blindly doing the bidding of those unskillful states of mind. The ones that say, I want that and I don't want that. I need to do whatever is necessary to get that, and anything that I have to do to avoid that is worth it. And we do this blind bidding of those fear-based parts of our mind. What was interesting was when I was experiencing this dread, there was no event, say, coming up that I was dreading in particular. It was just this feeling of general dread. Something horrible was going to happen, but I didn't know what. So my fear-based mind, of course, was going hog wild with this, right? So yes, I did feel stuck in one sense, but in another sense, I was like, wait a minute, there's a shit ton of energy around this. It's not just stuckness. There's this tidal wave of energy rushing around and crashing down, urging me to do something. But I didn't know what, because there was no actual problem other than the feeling of dread in itself. So that was the first thing that I noticed was, okay, there's a lot of movement here. And where there's movement, there's malleability. So if there's an actual dreaded event that we're worried about, what happens after the event? Well, the dread usually goes away, right? But even in this case where I wasn't dealing with an event I was worried about, it was just this feeling of dread, period, about nothing in particular. Certain things still affected it. If I happened to get a good night's sleep, okay, the dread eased up a little bit. After eating, after taking a shower, these things had an effect on the level of dread I was experiencing in the moment. Which means that dread was subject to cause and effect. And those of you who have been with me long enough know that when I start talking about cause and effect, I'm talking about karma. Not karma in the way we think of it in Western society with its bastardized version of, okay, revenge and what comes around goes around. He's going to get his. Buddhist karma. Cause and effect. So if dread and my experience of dread is subject to cause and effect, that led me to my first main insight about dread, which is, like pretty much anything else, dread is not a static, fixed thing. Dread is a process. Dread is a process. Sometimes I talk about when I first started working with physical pain, and I was so surprised when I stop pushing against some physical pain or discomfort, even just something like an itch. It doesn't have to be some crazy pain, just some kind of minor discomfort. When you stop trying to push it away and have this mental image of it as this stuck thing in this part of your body, and you start to inquire, say, well, no, what is this actually like? After spending decades of saying, no, get the fuck out of here. No, turn around. What's actually here? What is this actually like? And I started to realize, oh, wait a minute. This sensation isn't some monolithic stuck block in me. It's moving. There's pulsation. There's increasing and decreasing intensity. There's energy, movement. Sometimes I would try to really pin down exactly where the sensation was. And as soon as I thought I spotted it and got it nailed down, well, it moved. Huh? Wow. That's because it's a process. Dread is a process. So the question becomes, what causes or conditions can we set into motion to manage or alleviate the dread at a deeper level? Because if it's a process, something has to be perpetuating it. Has to be. And what I started to see was, like I was saying a few moments ago, the way that the anticipation itself starts to become dreadful. What I noticed was the process feels unstoppable because it's feeding on its own momentum. Funny thing about emotions, they have a way of perpetuating themselves. They beget themselves. For example, I've noticed when I feel sad, I won't just feel sad. I'll feel sad about feeling sad. Sometimes when we experience anger, we're not just angry at whatever it is that we think we're angry at. We start getting angry just about the fact that we feel angry. I shouldn't have to feel this way. Why do you make me feel like that? Right? We feel happy about feeling happy, right? And I have found for myself, and this may resonate with some of you, I feel dread about feeling dread. So there's this cycle that feeds upon itself. That was my second insight into this. And that led me to my third one was, all right, well, how do we stop this damn thing then? And that's why I call this talk Disintegrating Dread. And what I'm talking about here is literally disintegration. Often when we think of disintegration, we think something disappears. Sometimes I talk about disillusionment, and I always say I'm talking literally about disillusionment, actually stripping away our delusion, our unclear seeing. So that's the same thing here. I'm talking about disintegration, actually separating out the individual components, making up what's effectively a system that comprises this process. And those components, typically physical, felt sense, and the mind. Which, not coincidentally, if you look at the Buddha's 4 frames of reference, when he talks about the foundations of mindfulness, these are the first 3. The 4th one being mental qualities, which is a talk for another day. So why would we break these things apart? What does that buy us? It gives us the chance to examine each part by itself. This redirects our focus from the content of the dread to the process of the dread. Okay? Because when dread is happening, there's usually a lot of fear and anxiety wrapped up in that. And fear and anxiety require imagination. We don't fear something that we're feeling now because we're in the middle of feeling it. Fear, this anticipation, this requires imagination. And we start creating these storylines around what we fear we might feel. Usually in a well-intentioned attempt to try to be prepared for it, right? But does it really work? No, not really. It just kind of makes us more miserable. And this is exactly the kind of pattern that the Buddha was talking about when he said, this is how we create suffering for ourselves. So we're diverting our attention from the content that we are generating in the form of these storylines about the dread and perhaps the event that we're dreading, if there is one. I mean, I didn't have one. And we're shifting our attention and our focus to the process of the dread itself. What are the causes and effects? How is this system actually working? And one of the most powerful aspects of disintegrating this process of dread into its individual components is that it starts to short circuit the feedback loops that play out among those components. When we start telling ourselves storylines that are based in fear and dread, our subconscious mind and body, they don't know that that's not really happening. It doesn't know the difference between something we are actually perceiving and reacting to versus a storyline that we are creating and reacting to. So the body reacts the same way either way. The body says, oh, there's an emergency? Okay, let's get that fight or flight going. And then that just serves as more fuel for the mind to say, okay, there's a real emergency here, and look what we've just created for ourselves. Big emergency out of nothing. When we break down the components into individual, manageable pieces, that helps stop those feedback loops. Another advantage of this is the same way emotions have a way of begetting themselves. Feel sad about being sad, angry about being angry, happy about being happy, feeling dread about feeling dread. We feel uncomfortable with discomfort. And one of the things that makes us feel uncomfortable is something that is unfamiliar, because there could be danger there, right? As I was saying at the beginning, we usually spend most of our lives trying to push away feelings of pain. When I was talking about the physical pain, like it seems so solid and fixed, and until we start to open up to it and say, oh, wait a minute, this isn't at all what I thought it was like. We don't get familiar with these processes. And if we're not familiar with them, that's uncomfortable. And we're uncomfortable about that discomfort. So again, it's another cycle that feeds on itself. The more uncomfortable we feel, the more we try to get away from it, and the less familiar we continue to be with it, and it just perpetuates. This disintegration into individual components gives us a smaller chunk that we can work with at a time to gain a little bit of familiarity. Oh, here's just the physical sensation. And then we can notice, oh, look, the mind is starting to pick up on that and run away with it. Okay, let's come back to the physical sensation. Oh, look, the mind just tried to do the thinking. Oh, let's come back. Oh, look, it just did it again. And we start to see, oh, holy shit, okay. Ah, this is the process. This is the process. And we gain some familiarity and, as I was saying a few moments ago, some disillusionment. Because the illusion is we're just caught in this whirlwind, right? And it's like, well, no, it feels like a whirlwind, but hey, look at how this is. Oh, this is how the sausage is made. And we start to see, well, geez, this is fucking stupid. What the hell am I doing? Yeah. Some of you have heard me tell my story about the very first time I ever practiced meditation in a dream. I'd been practicing for about 7 or 8 years, and at this point, the practice had finally seeped into my subconscious enough. I had this nightmare one night that I was on this roller coaster just by myself in the front car. I couldn't see behind me. This impossibly high roller coaster. And with my anxiety issues, I've never been on a roller coaster, okay? I am impossibly high up in the sky, and I can see I'm coming to the top, and it's about to go over, and I'm freaking out. And I'm looking any which way to get out of here, and I'm panicking, and suddenly I remembered my mindfulness practice in this dream. And it wasn't a lucid dream. I didn't know I was dreaming. It had finally seeped in enough that it came to me subconsciously. Hey, mindfulness. I realized I can't do anything about this. I am stuck here. But I do have the option to observe whatever happens. And right in the dream, I came to my breathing and opened to the experience as it was. And the dream stopped. Immediately. And why did the dream stop? Because I had stopped perpetuating the storyline out of the fear that the storyline itself was creating. There was nothing there but what I was creating. And when I stopped giving it the fuel, I had nothing left to run on. It was a really profound experience for me. I was able to really see, oh, holy shit. There was no clearer indication of not just cause and effect, but how I was creating my own suffering. And stopped. So the openness, the familiarity that we can develop with the parts of the system and how they interact or integrate, right, with each other. Seeing the effect of changing causes and conditions. Seeing how we have a say in how this process plays out. This led me to see how dread and fear are like a cloud. It's like at the beginning of the talk when I said I created this definition around what I was dealing with so that it wouldn't have this black cloud effect. It really is like a cloud. It seems solid when you look at it from the outside. But then when you start to walk what you perceive as being the inside, and you look around, it's just like, there's nothing here. And you go to grab it, and there's just not, it's vapor. We're creating this cloud. We don't necessarily have a say in an initial feeling of, say, dread that may come up. But the extent to which it becomes a cloud, we have a big say in that depending on how we deal with a feeling of dread or fear that may arise. And I'll wrap up by saying this, and we'll get to some sitting. Okay? One of the best things, and one of the most powerful things for turning this around for me in my practice was after getting over that initial hump of trying to open to some of these feelings for the first time, which is scary as hell. Okay. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Of course it is. That's why we're here to work on it, right? So we can stop suffering, creating our own horseshit, right? Once I started to do that and gain some familiarity with that process, I started to notice another cause and effect scenario, which was that simply moving into discomfort, simply opening to these difficult states, not only lessened or eased the difficulty of experiencing them, but it even started to become a rewarding experience. Because I started to associate, when I move into something uncomfortable, it feels really good afterwards. I started to realize comfort doesn't happen in a vacuum. Comfort isn't really a thing. Again, comfort, discomfort, these are processes, just like dread. Comfort is just the thing that you feel after you've experienced discomfort. So I started to notice, when I move into this discomfort, when I examine this discomfort, when I start to tease apart the components, it may not feel pleasant. Right? Like I always say, I call my practice mindfulness in blue jeans. It's a blue collar practice, going to get a little dirty sometimes. Meditation can be beautiful, but it ain't always pretty. We're going to be dealing with some muck, right? But I started to notice, every time I do this, goddamn, it feels pretty good afterwards when I come out the other side. And then I feel a little more open to moving through the next thing that comes up. And we start to replace this cycle of dread where we shrink in upon ourselves. We start to turn that around. And it becomes a cycle of growth. And just like everything else, that then feeds on itself, perpetuates itself. So we're still engaging in this cycle, or you might say it's a spiral, because now we're growing upward instead of being stuck going in the same loop, right? But now it's sustainable. It's healthy. It's skillful. Let's practice for a little bit. Do a little sitting, okay? As always, let's begin by imagining that we are suspended from the ceiling by a string attached to the top of our head as a nice cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. Any tension we may be experiencing mentally, physically, emotionally, that's fine. We don't need to try to get rid of it. Attempting to force tension away is just adding more tension to tension. It doesn't make sense. So if there is some tension here, it's welcome to be here. And it's welcome to leave in its own time, which may be today and may not. And let's also notice what is supporting us. A chair, floor. Something is underneath us holding us up. Even if we don't feel particularly supported right now, it's still there. So let's take a moment to notice what is supporting us at the bottom. And have this gentle lift at the top. And simply notice whatever is in between that we are starting with in our practice today. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. You may notice that you have started to shape the breathing as soon as bringing attention to it, which is usually what we do. It's usually what happens. In this practice, there's no need to do that. Our meditative breath is simply the breathing that we are noticing as we are meditating, as we are paying attention to it. Like dread, like all of the emotions I mentioned, breathing is a process. One of the reasons that we pay attention to the breathing is so that we can examine that process. If we can develop the skill of observing the process of breathing, as well as the processes around the breathing, like how we feel about it, that's a powerful skill. Because what's more central to our survival than our breathing? And sometimes we feel like we have to control it to make sure we're getting enough air or achieving a proper mindfulness mind state. Or if we can simply observe the process of breathing, that's a skill that translates to being able to observe a lot of other things. So let's start with just the raw energy of the breathing. Just that. You might notice a particular body part where the breathing is passing through. The nostrils, the back of the throat, the chest. Or you might watch the entire trajectory of an entire in-breath and out-breath. But notice what happens if we simply watch just the raw energy of the breathing, exactly as it is, coming and going. Can we keep it just that simple for a minute or so? So you may notice that a lot of things are coming up. it's usually pretty challenging to stay wholly with the breathing, even just for a minute. Mental images arising, thoughts, feelings. If those are happening for you, they are not taking away from your practice. They are not distractions from your practice. They are not a sign that you are failing at your practice. Noticing that they are happening is the practice. We are observing cause and effect. Oh, when I try to focus here, look at all this other stuff that happens. And look at the cycles that perpetuate from there. We could spin off into a daydream. We could spin off into a worst-case scenario storyline. We could notice all the thoughts coming up and start condemning ourselves for not doing the practice right because all these things are coming up. That's a storyline too. That's a process too. That's what we're here to see. We don't have to condemn the system for being a system. We're here to see what the system is. Now, we may not like what we see, but isn't that all the more reason to check it out and see what the hell it's doing? Because otherwise, how are we going to make it change? So let's take another minute. Just the raw energy of the breathing. Exactly as it is. Now, while still remaining anchored on the breathing, you may start to bring some attention to another part of the body where it's not immediately obvious that the breathing is happening. Perhaps an area where you're feeling physical discomfort. Perhaps an area that is feeling particularly energized because of an emotional state. what happens? What do you find? When simply opening up to that raw energy, that sensation, perhaps sending the breathing to it. Not necessarily by shaping the breathing physically, but just understanding that all of the breath energy is, of course, ultimately reaching every cell of the body. So it is getting there. Can we stay just with the physical experience? And if feelings or thoughts come up, okay, we notice that. But right now, we put them aside. We'll get to them. Right now, our attention is on the breathing and the physical sensation. And you may choose to stick with physical sensation or the raw energy of just the breathing itself. If you'd like to move on to using the feelings as our frame of reference for our mindfulness. In this case, when we talk about feelings, we don't mean emotions like we think of them. In the Buddhist terminology, feelings refer to noticing things as being pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So while remaining anchored on the breathing, if and when things come up physically, mentally, emotionally, we simply notice, is this pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? And it's not about how many of each kind we see. We're not maintaining a tally and then making an assessment of, no. The intention here is to see the feelings, but separating them from the storylines that we so quickly generate based on them. I want more of this pleasant thing. I don't want this unpleasant. I'm bored with this neutral thing. No, we're noticing. Just the felt sense itself. Separating the feelings from all those focal points. If the mind runs away with us, or we run away with the mind, we simply notice and come back to whatever it is we're working with. The breathing, bodily sensation, feelings of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Perhaps even including feelings about working with the feelings of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Those are just feelings too, right? Again, these things beget themselves. They're cycles. That's what we're here to see. How do these things perpetuate, and what's our role in it? So we can take the negative cycles and turn them around. Now you may continue working with whichever component of the system that you prefer. I'll briefly mention the next frame of reference, which will be our last one for today, which is the mind. And there are many techniques that we have for working with the mind. The one I have typically found most effective for myself when dealing with things like dread has been the labeling technique. When a certain thought comes up, we simply label it. And we might label it very specifically, like this thing I have to do tomorrow that I'm freaking out about. Or very generally, like, oh, there's dread again, there's fear again, there's hope again. And this is another way of gaining that familiarity again. Slapping a label onto whatever that is that's coming up, that mental construct, not only buys us some familiarity with it, creates a little breathing room, a little space, it also has a way of creating some familiarity with how damn often the same things just come up over and over again. That's part of seeing this process. Seeing what it's doing. How relentless it can be sometimes. How ridiculous it can be sometimes. Developing that clear seeing of what's really happening here. Because once we see it clearly enough, we don't have to talk ourselves out of doing it. We don't have to talk ourselves into dropping a hot potato, right? We just friggin' do it. Once we see these things clearly enough, the changes just seem to happen automatically. We don't have to convince ourselves of anything. The last thing that I'll mention for the sitting is when I'm working with something very energized, when there's this volatility and this feeling of not being in control. Those are the times when I visualize the practice as surfing. I imagine I'm in these whitewater rapids. And not with a boat, mind you. I'm in the whitewater rapids. And I'm getting swept away and pulled under and going down for the third time, the whole bit. And I'm fighting and I'm struggling. And the harder I fight and I struggle, the more I get pulled down. And then at some point I realize, if I stop fighting and struggling, which don't seem to be buying me much, if I change the causes and conditions here, if I change what I'm doing, if I stop that, because it ain't working, well, geez, the energy of the rapids, the waves, they actually pull me up. And you almost kind of start riding on top of them. Riding the momentum instead of fighting the momentum. And then at some point, you can kind of start to surf on them. Still not really in control. And you're going wherever they're taking you. But at least now you're not drowning, right? And then at some point, you gain enough balance, enough familiarity, enough skill with that process that, you can jump off onto the side, onto a riverbank. And maybe even then climb up onto a ledge and look down at the whitewater rapids that had been pulling you under. And it's not that they're no longer there. It's not that they're no longer rushing. But you've gained a little space, a little breathing room, the ability to observe that energy instead of getting both in its way and by extension, your way. That all begins by breaking down the process into these manageable parts. I'm going to put a few links into the chat where we get to some Q&A. The first one is for my website, mindfulness-based.com. These free sessions are supported by one-on-one sessions that I do. If you are working with something right now that's perhaps causing you some difficulty and would like to discuss it a little further in a Buddhist context, some of these practices that have helped me and so many others so much, I invite you to take a look at my site. You can set up something there or drop me a line if you have any questions. I have my YouTube channel on there. I publish a bunch of my sessions, including some of these out there, typically once every 2 weeks or so. For anyone who's interested in supporting these, I have a Patreon site out there as well as my Venmo at Mindfulness in Blue Jeans. And with that, I think we should move on to what's my favorite part, is hearing what's on all of your minds. So anyone who has any thoughts, questions, observations. Hey, Scott.
Hi, Ron. I hope you're well.
Good to see you, my friend. Cheers.
Good to see you too. Thank you. I'm sure I've commented on this before once or twice, but I've been doing meditation practice for a little over a year now. Almost daily, and still find myself asking that question. You know the question.
I do.
And it is?
Am I doing this right?
Exactly. Right now, I'm sitting in a recliner. I decided not to sit upright. I don't know if that's a violation. I don't know if I'm supposed to be perfectly still, not scratching itches. I don't know. I mean, is there, I don't think there is a mindfulness or meditation God as such, or police, but I just don't know if I'm doing it right.
I am not aware of any meditation police. I have not been arrested yet. And I'm sure I've probably done some things over the course of 24 years that should have gotten me thrown in the slammer. And I'm sure I will again. It really depends on who you ask, where you look. You can read some texts that will say, if you're not in lotus position, you're not doing it right. Well, I can tell you after damage I've done to my knees over the years, you'll probably never see me in lotus position again. I've always, not surprisingly, I have always taken to the Buddha's approach, which is, this is your practice. And there's no should about it. The Buddha didn't come out and say, you should do this and you should. Quite frankly, Buddha didn't really give a rat's ass what you did. He said, look, this is what I did. This is how I did it. I highly recommend you try it. Don't take my word for anything I say, because if you just believe what I say because I say it without actually doing the stuff, you're missing the point entirely. If you find that what is right for your practice in this moment is being in a recliner, then go with that. I would probably not do a deliberate sitting in a recliner because I'd probably fall asleep. But if I happen to find myself in a recliner at one of those moments where I'm like, oh, wait, let me come to my breathing, remember to be present, remember to watch what I'm doing and observe what's coming up. I'm not going to get up from the recliner specifically. Okay, well, if I'm going to do that, I got to go on my cushion and I got to do that. No, of course you can be there and meditate. Of course. I mean, meditation is mindfulness meditation, Vipassana. This is simply the practice of clear seeing in the interest of alleviating our suffering. I'm fairly certain that's not impossible on a recliner, on a lazy boy, all right? So it's really about what is right for you. If you are engaging in something that you are finding is skillful for you in that moment, and skillful in this case, I mean in the Buddhist sense, it's not causing suffering and hopefully alleviating suffering. That's what matters. I had somebody ask me a number of years ago, I think I had posted some pictures on social media or something. I had gone on vacation and come back with some cool Tibetan artwork, which I have an affinity for, go figure, and posted some pictures on social media or something. I was like on Facebook or something. I was like, oh, here's some things I got from my meditation room. And somebody posted a question. Oh, what's required for a meditation room? And I said, usually 4 walls and a ceiling. I mean, my meditation room for a number of years was completely barren. My wife used to joke it looked like a freaking hospital because it was just these white walls with nothing. And she's like, I'm like, well, it's not like anybody's ever coming in here. It's my meditation room, so it doesn't need anything, So that's what it was for years. It was just this barren room. You don't even need a room. You just need the presence of mind to notice what's here and what am I doing with it and how's it working out for me. And based on that, what do I do next? And that's it. That's doing it right. That's it.
So there's really no holds barred.
The bottom line question is always, am I increasing or decreasing my suffering?
Mm-hmm.
That's been my guide for almost a quarter of a century. It's your practice, and only you know for sure what is skillful for you in any given moment. And even figuring out what that is for each of us in any given moment is part of the practice, because like everything else I've talked about today, that's a process. That's not fixed or static either, which is one of the challenges of this practice is It's a moving target always. Always. I hope that helps.
And thank you. It does.
Awesome. Cheers.
It gives me a little self-confidence that I'm not effing up.
The mere fact that you are asking the question, like I say, that's why I call my Mindfulness 101 session, Am I Doing This Right? Because anytime we ask, am I doing this right? The answer kind of has to be yes. Because in that moment, what are we doing? We're inquiring as to what we're doing and how it's working out. And implied in that is, what should I be doing next? So asking that question in itself is the practice. It is the practice.
Cool. Well, thank you. And to anticipate your response, cheers.
You know me too well, my friend.
I know you.
You've attended quite a few of these.
Yeah, I try. Thanks again.
So, cheers to you, my friend.
Thanks.
Hey, Christine. How's it going?
Okay. It doesn't have exactly anything to do with what Scott said, because I am sitting up when I'm doing these, but I tend to fall asleep all the time. Or I don't know, just go out of it. And then they say sort of come to, and then I'm just trying to I kind of open my eyes and I'm trying to focus, and everything gets out of focus. This keeps happening to me. If it's like anything near a half an hour, I mean, I've done meditations lying down, sometimes in the morning or sitting up, but it doesn't matter. I can fall asleep if they go beyond a certain time, and I don't know how you stop that from happening.
If you find a way to stop that from happening, will you let me know?
Okay, I just didn't know whether it happens to other people or whether
it happens to this
I'm
guy.
Tired.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So there are a couple of things for that. And that's one of the reasons that I typically do my daily, the practice that I set time aside for, typically in the morning, because it helps decrease that. But there are things that you can absolutely do it with the eyes open. I generally recommend eyes closed when possible, simply because it helps to remove the visual stimuli, which can help pull us away from our anchors. Mm-hmm. But we can open the eyes a little bit and have a downward gaze. Even just having the eyes slightly open can help. And one thing that I do want to point out that I don't mention all that often, and maybe I should bring it up a little more often, is I don't teach controlling of the breathing for a couple of reasons. First off, it was a huge thing for me to learn how to stop controlling the breathing, because I had spent so many years, when I was in my panic days, I had spent so many years deliberately controlling my breathing, and that was causing all kinds of problems, having to be hypervigilant and so forth. So for me, learning how to release controlling the breathing was enormously helpful and challenging. So I teach that because it's the way I practice. And I have also found over the years that many people have really taken to that because they're so tired of having to try to control or think that they have to control the breathing. Or some other teachers have said, control the breathing this way, and they don't find it covered. They're like, holy shit, wait, I don't have to control the breathing. So I focus on that a lot. That's not to say that you can't work with the breathing. The teacher that Tanasaru Bhikkhu, the one that I quote at almost all of these sessions, he talks a lot about deliberately controlling the breathing. And when sleepiness comes up, that's one of those times when he says, start to try to deepen the breathing and see what the effect is. So you can absolutely play with the breathing. That's not something that is against this practice. I'm simply teaching an alternate way.
So I do the breathing because I have a lung issue. So I actually do the breathing. Yeah, I mean, I almost always do the breathing. And sometimes I just kind of drop it off and then I start it up again. So
yeah. So that's an option as well. There's a lot of things you can play. Again, it's causes and conditions, right? Yeah. Experiment. And if you see what works, see what doesn't. And sometimes, you know what? You're going to fall asleep. Is that necessarily the worst thing in the world? Some people pay extra for that. Right?
I know. I don't know. I don't really know if I'm asleep. It's just, but I definitely feel like I'm out of it. Maybe I'll stare at a candle or something like that. I don't know.
Experiment. Yeah.
I'll try that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers. I got one from Judy, and hey, Judy, in the chat. If we can set a timer on a cell phone, know when to end. Yeah. So that's an interesting one. I spent the first, it's been 24 years, and I started, some of you know, I have sessions up on Insight Timer. I think I started that about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. So I spent the first almost 20 years of my practice without a timer. And then I discovered Insight Timer, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Maybe I'll try doing it with a timer and see what happens. Back when I first started, I remember one of the questions I asked the psychologist who got me started after I'd been doing it for a couple of weeks. I said to him, I have a funny question. If what I'm doing is observing what's coming up and how I'm dealing with it, how do I know when to stop? Like, how do you make the decision to stop rather than just, observe that you feel like you're ready to stop? And what he said to me was, notice the first time that you feel ready to stop and just observe that. The second time it comes up, then maybe stop, and that stuck with me for a long time. And it's basically what I did for a couple of decades. And then I was like, oh, Insight Timer, this is interesting. I wonder what would happen if I set a timer for 50 minutes, because I would typically sit 20, 25, 30 minutes. And what happens if I set 45, 50 minutes and bang, gonna do that? What comes up? And that's what I ended up doing for a while. And I don't always do 50 minutes. I'm usually back to 25, 30 minutes. My typical timer is 30 minutes in the morning. But yeah, I've started doing that. And I don't feel one way or the other about it, really. It's just another thing to experiment with and see what comes up. I mean, there's really nothing better that you can do in a general sense than experiment and see what you have to experiment and see what works. There are wrong ways of doing this practice. There are. But there is no one right way. There are many, many, many right ways. And experimentation is key to discover what is skillful for us at any given time, as well as to keep the practice fresh. We can fall into a rut with our practice and start dialing it in without even which happened to me a number of years ago. I was doing that for several months and kind of caught myself. I was like, wait a minute, what the hell am I doing? Like, I was really phoning it in for a while. It really just gotten a little too routine, maybe. So yeah, that experimentation is really key. There's a question in the chat about eternal calmness. Eternal calmness. Geez, I don't know. Is that a thing? I don't know that that's a thing. I would say my thought on eternal calmness would be, if such a thing exists, I don't anticipate that I would find it by seeking eternal calmness. That's what I would say. It's the reason I don't really talk about enlightenment. The best way to never achieve enlightenment is to be worried about achieving enlightenment. If enlightenment's going to happen, I don't know what it's like. Maybe I've had it. If I know, is it something that once you've got it, you've got it? Is it something that comes in little spurts here and there? I don't know. If and when it happens, I guess it happens. It's not why I came to this practice, really, right? I mean, I came to this practice because I was stuck at home with anxiety and panic. So for me, just being able to work again and go out again, that was enough, right? My concern is, am I alleviating my suffering right now? Or am I causing myself suffering right now? And if I work on that, well, who cares about eternal calm? That'll take care of itself. Enlightenment, that'll take care of itself. How am I doing right now? What causes and conditions am I setting right now? I don't have a choice about the effects, really. I'm creating the likelihood for better effects if I'm creating better causes and conditions, but I don't really have a choice, because the effects are not just caused by my causes and conditions. They're caused by all kinds of other things too. So I don't worry too much about the eternal anything, really. The eternal will take care of itself if I just keep working at what's here now, which is all I really have a choice about. That's my feeling on it. Hi, Barbara.
Hi there. Hi there. I'm a little bit obsessed with your dream about the roller coaster.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you could expand on it in terms of, you feel the dread as you're going uphill.
Yeah.
Because you know it's going to be totally insane when you go down.
Yeah.
So you experience the dread. Let's say you succeed you've been meditating a long time. Okay, I'm going to watch my breath. I'm going to try to maintain things. And you go down and you experience terror. So I'm not sure how the meditative process will have helped you with the terror, even if you're observing what, from a certain distance, what's going on as you're heading up. And the only thing I've come up with, maybe I want you to talk about it, is that ultimately, if you had to keep on this roller coaster and keep going up and down, that the terror would lessen, would decrease the more you did this.
This is where that distinction between pain and suffering comes in. For those who haven't heard my spiel on it, basically the line between pain and suffering is choice. If somebody punches me in the face, I'm going to feel pain. I don't have a choice about that. How I deal with that, the storylines I may create around that, how I handle that, that's going to determine whether I suffer or not. What I'm hearing in your question is, how does the practice stop me from feeling pain?
Okay.
In this case, the terror. The terror that we don't have a choice about, say. Well, it doesn't. Not directly. I'm not going to get punched in the face by somebody and become incredibly mindful and not feel that sensation. If anything, I'm going to feel the sensation even more acutely because I'm being with it completely. What I'm not doing is adding all the suffering storylines on top of it, which in the case of terror is adding more terror onto the terror that's already there. Now, when I say that it's not going to directly affect what I'm calling pain. That doesn't mean that it doesn't ultimately affect it. What I have found is the pain going to stop because we're practicing mindfulness? No. But it does change our relationship to it. The clearest example or parallel of this that I can give is the one of reaction and response. Okay, the same way I divide pain and suffering by choice, I divide reaction and response by choice. When something happens, reaction is automatic. Now, whether that automatic is because it's something evolutionary or it's a habit that we've developed over the years, it doesn't matter where it came from. The fact is, if it was, the reaction is the part we don't have a choice about. It's that automatic piece. Once we've had a chance to process, which may just be a couple of seconds, once we've had a chance to process and formulate a response, there's choice there. There's volition there. What I have found is it's dysfunctional to try to work with the reaction. That's when we start trying to suppress things, and that just goes in the wrong direction. When we work on the response, what I have found is over time, even though I can't directly work with the reaction, I have found that working with the response over time seeps into the reaction. So even though there may be a certain reaction coming up, my relationship to it has changed. Same thing with the pain and the suffering. When we stop laying in more suffering, when we have changed the causes and conditions so that we are not adding on more shit, and we are now fully experiencing the actual shit, all right? Just like I was talking about with disintegrating the process so we can see what's really going on. There's that clear seeing. And when we've developed clear seeing into what's actually going on, instead of laying our own other shit on top of it, the relationship with that changes as a result of that clear seeing. And not only do we end up removing all of that suffering, but now we gain that familiarity that I was talking about. It's like anything else. If you imagine something you had to do for the first time and you found it terrifying, and then you had to do it again, was it equally as terrifying the second time? Probably not. If you then had to do it 5 more times, was the 7th time as terrifying as the first one? Probably not.
Yeah.
It's that same thing. You're getting a familiarity with the process and you're seeing what it's actually like instead of spinning storylines. You're spinning the storylines the first time because you don't know what to expect yet. It's that unfamiliarity. Once you've learned what to expect, you don't need the storylines anymore. You know what you're in for. And you may still feel pain if it's a painful kind of experience. But are you generating all the suffering you were the first time? Probably not. Is the pain still there? Yeah, maybe. Is the experience of the pain the same? Highly unlikely. That's what we're driving at. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Good.
I'll dwell on that for a while. Yeah.
Please. Yeah. Let that system process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers. I'm going to wrap it up there. Feel free to drop me a line if you have any questions, and probably be doing the next one of these in a couple of weeks. And look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Take care.
Thanks
Cheers.
very
Everyone
much.
be well. Thanks, Ron.
I know.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Ron, how do I
Bye.
drop you a line?
What's that?
How do I drop you a line?
Do you see my links in the chat?
Yes.
Yep. If you go to my website and go to the contact page, you can message me through there. I'll also put my direct email into the chat if you like.
Oh, that would be good. Thank
Sure. There you go. Ron Levine at mindfulness-based.com.
you. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.